Imagine sitting in your own living room, surrounded by the people you love most in the world, your son, your daughter-in-law, and your two grown grandchildren, only to hear them calmly explain how they've decided it's time for you to move into a nursing home. Not because you're ill, not because you can't cope, but because, as they put it, they need to handle your affairs. It's a moment of chilling realization, a sudden, sharp intake of breath that steals the air from your lungs. You thought they were family, a source of comfort and love, until she realized her own family saw her as nothing more than a source of money. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe family should protect, not exploit each other. Hit that like button and subscribe for more. This is the story of how one woman, faced with the ultimate betrayal by her own flesh and blood, chose to fight back, not with anger, but with quiet determination and a strategic mind they never knew she possessed. But what she discovered next would force her to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation. Eleanor was a woman who had built her life on generosity and trust. Widowed 10 years prior, she lived comfortably but not extravagantly in the home she and her late husband had shared for 40 years. It was a large, older house, paid off, in a desirable neighborhood. Her finances were sound, a mix of her husband's pension, Social Security, and careful investments managed over decades. She had always been there for her family, offering a helping hand without a second thought. When her son, Mark, and his wife, Sarah, struggled with their first mortgage, Eleanor had gifted them a substantial amount for the down payment. She'd helped pay for her grandchildren's college tuitions, covered unexpected medical bills for Sarah's family, and was always the first call when anyone needed a loan, which, she now realized with a pang, was quite often from Mark and Sarah. She loved her grandchildren, Emily and Tom, dearly, and spoiling them a little was one of her greatest joys. She believed in family, in supporting one another, in the idea that her resources were, in a sense, the family's resources, to be shared and used for the collective good. This deep-seated belief, a lifetime of unconditional love and support, formed the bedrock of her relationship with them, a bedrock that was about to be violently shaken. Mark and Sarah were always struggling, or so they claimed. There was always a car repair, a roof leak, a business opportunity that needed a sudden infusion of cash. Eleanor had always provided, often dipping into her savings, believing it was her role as a mother and grandmother. Their sense of entitlement had grown subtly over the years, starting with casual remarks about her large house being too much for one person and escalating to unsolicited advice about her spending habits. They saw her solid financial position not as the result of her and her husband's hard work and prudence, but as a static pool of money they were somehow owed. Their own finances were a mess, riddled with debt and impulsive spending, yet they lived as if their next bailout was guaranteed. One evening, Mark and Sarah were over for dinner, and after the grandchildren had gone to the living room, Eleanor overheard them talking in hushed tones in the kitchen. "She's so resistant," Sarah sighed, exasperated. "It shouldn't be this hard. We just need her to sign the papers," Mark replied. "I know, but she keeps asking questions. It would be so much simpler if she just trusted us. It's for her own good, really. This house is too much for her." Eleanor's heart sunk. Papers? Trust them? It sounded less like concern and more like a transaction. The seed of doubt was planted, cold and heavy in her stomach. She pushed it away, telling herself she was being paranoid. They loved her. They were her family. But the feeling lingered. The house, her sanctuary, felt subtly different that night, less like home, more like an asset being eyed. The true betrayal, the cold, hard shock that shattered her carefully constructed reality, came a few weeks later. Mark and Sarah had insisted on helping her sort through some old boxes in the attic, a task Eleanor felt perfectly capable of handling herself, but they were insistent, citing her age and potential for falls. While they were upstairs, Eleanor went to the study to retrieve a document she needed. The door was ajar, and she heard voices. It was Mark and Sarah, their backs to the door, reviewing some papers on her desk. Their tones were low, conspiratorial. Eleanor froze in the hallway, something in their posture, the way they glanced around nervously, screaming wrong. She heard Sarah say, "The market is hot right now. We need to list it within the month. Get the cash before she can change her mind," Mark responded. "Exactly. And the place we looked at in Fairhaven is perfect. Basic, clean, and they have availability. Tell her it's temporary, for her safety and care needs. Once the house is sold and the money is secured, it won't matter what she thinks Fairhaven." Eleanor knew Fairhaven. It was a budget nursing home notorious for minimal staffing and limited amenities. The blood drained from her face. They weren't planning on moving her to a place for her safety and care. They were planning on selling her home and dumping her somewhere cheap and out of the way, purely for the money. The conversation continued, detailing how they would manage the sale, how they would divide the profits, and how they needed to make sure she didn't talk to anyone who might put ideas in her head. They laughed, a short, sharp sound that scraped against Eleanor's soul. They were discussing her future, her home, her entire life, as if she were a piece of furniture to be moved and sold off. The shock was physical, a wave of nausea and dizziness. This wasn't misplaced concern or even simple entitlement. This was calculated, cruel exploitation. Her initial disbelief warred with the undeniable evidence of their voices, their plans, their cold calculation. She stumbled back silently, retreating to the kitchen, her hands shaking. The denial she had clung to for weeks crumbled, replaced by a terrifying clarity. This wasn't about helping her, it was about robbing her. Gathering her wits, forcing down the panic, her first instinct was protection. She went back to her study later that day, when they were gone, and found the papers they had been looking at. They were draft power of attorney forms, naming Mark and Sarah as her joint attorneys in fact, with broad powers over her finances and property. They hadn't asked her to sign them yet, but the drafts were printed, ready. She carefully gathered those forms, along with her will, her bank statements, and the deed to her house. She tucked them into a secure box hidden deep in her closet, a small, trembling step towards protecting herself against the very people who were supposed to protect her. The house, once a symbol of security and family history, now felt like ground zero for a financial invasion. From that moment, the pressure intensified. Mark and Sarah became overly solicitous, constantly calling, stopping by, asking about her health, her memory, her ability to manage things. They subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, suggested she was becoming forgetful, that managing her house and finances was becoming too much for her. "Mom, are you sure you paid that bill?" Sarah would ask, holding a piece of mail. "Maybe you should let Mark take care of things for you, just so you don't have to worry," Mark would add. "It's just, you're getting older, Mom. We just worry about you being alone here." They pushed the idea of moving, first into a smaller apartment, then quickly pivoting back to the nursing home narrative, framing it as the safest option. They even brought the grandchildren into it. Emily and Tom, likely coached by their parents, started making comments like, "Grandma, Mom and Dad just want what's best for you. Maybe a home wouldn't be so bad?" You'd have people around Eleanor saw the flicker of discomfort in their eyes, the forced cheerfulness, and knew they were being used. It hurt more than the parents' manipulation. Eleanor started documenting everything. Every phone call was noted in a small diary she kept hidden under her mattress. Every visit, every comment questioning her capabilities, every mention of handling her affairs or the nursing home was recorded. She started saving text messages from Mark and Sarah, full of passive aggression and thinly veiled demands. She photographed the draft power of attorney forms she had found. This quiet act of gathering evidence, of creating a factual record of their insidious campaign, felt like building a shield. It was slow, painstaking work, but it anchored her in the face of their gaslighting. They tried to make her doubt herself, her memory, her ability to manage her own life, but the notes in her diary were objective proof of their manipulation. The next crucial step was seeking professional help. One afternoon, under the guise of running errands, Eleanor drove to a neighboring town and met with Ms. Evelyn Davies, an elder law attorney whose name she'd found through a trusted friend. Ms. Davies was sharp, kind, and listened patiently as Eleanor, tears welling in her eyes, laid out the story, the overheard conversation, the draft POA forms, the escalating pressure, the use of the grandchildren, the specific mention of the Fairhaven facility. Ms. Davies reviewed the documents Eleanor had brought. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice firm but gentle, "what you've described is classic elder exploitation. They're attempting to gain control of your assets through undue influence and potentially coercion. Finding these draft POAs is significant. They were clearly planning to present them to you, likely hoping you'd sign without fully understanding the implications, or worse, try to get you declared incompetent." She explained the legal avenues they might pursue, seeking guardianship, claiming she was a danger to herself, even attempting to challenge her will later. But she also explained Eleanor's rights. As long as she was mentally competent, which a brief, private assessment arranged by Ms. Davies quickly confirmed, she had every right to manage her own affairs, sell her property, and disinherit anyone she chose. Ms. Davies advised Eleanor to update her will immediately, explicitly stating her wishes and appointing an independent executor. Ms. Davies suggested a trust company or a neutral friend. She also recommended setting up a revocable living trust to manage her assets, offering an extra layer of protection and privacy, and making it harder for anyone to challenge her financial decisions. The legal consultations were empowering. Eleanor felt a sense of control slowly returning. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was planning. The family pressure intensified further when Mark and Sarah sensed Eleanor was not cooperating as easily as they had hoped. Their visits became more frequent, their questions more pointed. "Have you thought more about the nursing home, Mom? We really need to get this sorted," Mark insisted one day. "It's holding things up." "Holding what up?" Eleanor wondered, but didn't ask. Sarah began calling other family members, subtly spreading rumors. Eleanor's sister called, sounding worried. "Eleanor, Sarah mentioned you're having some trouble keeping track of things. Are you doing okay?" "They said you might need more care," Eleanor calmly reassured her sister, explaining she was perfectly fine, but the call confirmed Sarah's tactic of isolating her and creating a narrative of decline. During one particularly unpleasant visit, Mark and Sarah dropped the facade of concern almost entirely. "Mom," Mark began, his voice tight with frustration, "we need you to make a decision. This house is just sitting here, not doing anyone any good. If you won't agree to the nursing home and let us handle things, we might have to look at other options." Legally, Sarah leaned forward, her eyes hard. "We know you have money, Eleanor. You've always been generous. We're your family. We deserve security too. This house is old. It costs a fortune to maintain. It makes sense to sell it and use that money where it's needed." The implication was clear. Their needs trumped hers. This direct confrontation, stripping away the pretense of care, solidified Eleanor's resolve. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound, but it was now overlaid with a cold anger and a fierce determination to protect herself. They saw her as an obstacle, a resource to be plundered. She would show them she was a person with agency and a will of her own. The planning with Ms. Davies became her focus. Under Ms. Davies' guidance, Eleanor moved methodically. She updated her will, explicitly excluding Mark and Sarah, directing her assets instead to a charitable foundation and a small trust for her grandchildren, managed by an independent trustee, to be released when they were older and hopefully free from their parents' influence. She established the revocable living trust, transferring most of her liquid assets into it. The house remained the largest piece of the puzzle. Selling it was the ultimate protection, turning a fixed asset they were eyeing into fluid funds that could be secured and managed, making their plans obsolete. The opportunity arose quickly. The market in her neighborhood was indeed buoyant. Ms. Davies recommended a discreet realtor who specialized in probate and elder transitions. The house was quietly listed, shown to a select few buyers, and within days, a solid offer came in, above the asking price, with a quick closing date. Signing the contract was a monumental moment. It felt like severing a tie, painful but necessary. The house represented so many memories, but it had also become a focal point of their greed. Selling it meant freedom. It was a quiet act of war, executed without a single dramatic word or confrontation with her children. While she was finalizing the sale, Mark called, presenting another emergency. His car transmission had failed, a $5,000 repair. "Mom, I know you don't want to dip into your savings, but this is urgent. We need the car for work. Can you just lend us the money? We'll pay you back from." Well, from the house money later, Sarah chimed in about how stressed they were, how much they were doing, how ungrateful it felt that she wasn't helping them when they were doing so much for her, planning her nursing home stay and selling her house, presumably. Eleanor, armed with her legal counsel and her own hardening resolve, politely but firmly declined. "Mark, I'm not able to help with that right now. You'll have to figure something else out." His stunned silence on the other end of the line was almost comical. They were so used to her compliance, they couldn't comprehend a refusal. Their overconfidence, their absolute certainty that they controlled her resources, was their biggest blind spot. They continued to talk about future plans involving her house, unaware it was already under contract. The smoking gun, beyond the draft POAs, arrived in a different form. While packing sentimental items, Eleanor came across an old shared family computer Mark and Sarah had used years ago and left behind. Curiosity, or perhaps a subconscious need for more confirmation, led her to boot it up. Hidden deep in a folder, she found a string of emails between Mark, Sarah, and the administrator of the Fairhaven nursing home, explicitly discussing the costs, the minimum care levels, and the timeline for admission after the house sale. There were also emails detailing the projected profit from the sale and how they planned to spend it. It was cold, calculated, undeniable proof of their malicious intent. It wasn't just a thought, it was a fully formed, imminent plan. This discovery, while painful, stripped away any lingering doubt. It was the final piece she needed, solidifying her resolve. The closing date for the house sale was set. The funds were transferred directly into the trust managed by Ms. Davies' firm. And Eleanor, with a few essential belongings, moved out the day before closing, not to a nursing home, but to a charming, secure apartment in a complex favored by seniors, far from her old neighborhood and her children's easy reach. The day after the house closed, Mark and Sarah arrived at Eleanor's former home, ostensibly to pick her up for a nursing home tour they had called ahead, but Eleanor hadn't answered. They had a key, given to them years ago, and let themselves in, calling out her name. Silence. The house was empty. No furniture, no boxes, just bare rooms echoing their confusion. They found the note on the kitchen counter from the realtor, stating the property had been sold and asking them to return the key. Panic set in. Frantic calls to Eleanor's phone went unanswered. They tried her cell, which she had replaced with a new, unlisted number. Finally, Mark called Ms. Davies, whose number was listed on the realtor's note as the point of contact for inquiries. "This is Mark Vance. I understand you handled the sale of my mother's house," Mark demanded, trying to sound authoritative despite the tremor in his voice. Ms. Davies' response was polite but firm. "Yes, Mr. Vance. The sale closed yesterday. The proceeds have been secured in a trust for Mrs. Vance's benefit, as per her instructions. Your mother is no longer residing at that address, but she can't do that. Where is she? Where her children? We handle her affairs." Sarah could be heard shouting in the background. Ms. Davies remained calm. Mrs. Vance is an adult of sound mind and is legally entitled to manage her own affairs. She has made arrangements for her housing and finances independently. She has also requested that all future communication regarding her legal and financial matters go through my office. Any attempts to contact her directly will be considered harassment. Mark and Sarah's shock quickly turned to fury and desperation. They called Eleanor's sister, spreading a new version of the story, that Eleanor had been taken advantage of by a shady lawyer and scam artists who bought her house. But Eleanor's sister, already having heard from Eleanor that she was doing well, didn't fully buy it. Word of the sudden house sale and Eleanor's disappearance from the neighborhood spread. When questioned by extended family, Mark and Sarah had to admit they hadn't known about the sale, undermining their narrative of being in charge and looking out for her. Their attempts at damage control backfired, making their previous claims look suspicious. They tried calling Eleanor again, leaving tearful voicemails begging her to call them, claiming they were worried sick, that this mistake could be fixed. They even had the grandchildren leave messages, their young voices sounding confused and upset, clearly coached. Eleanor listened to the messages, her heart aching for the grandchildren, but steeling herself against the manipulative tactics. Ms. Davies advised her not to respond directly. A formal letter from Ms. Davies' office followed, outlining Eleanor's boundaries, stating explicitly that Mark and Sarah would not be inheriting anything from her estate, and warning them against further harassment. In the immediate aftermath, Eleanor settled into her new apartment. It was smaller, easier to manage, and felt safe. The quiet was a balm after months of tension. Legally, her affairs were secure. The house money was protected in the trust, providing her with a comfortable income and ensuring her future care would be of her choosing, managed by a professional trustee. Mark and Sarah were left reeling, their entitlement colliding head-on with the reality of their failure. They received nothing. Their own financial problems, which they had banked on solving with Eleanor's assets, remained, likely worse now that their expected windfall had vanished and their relationship with other family members was strained. The dynamic had irrevocably changed. Eleanor wasn't just mom or grandma anymore. She was a client of a law firm, protected by legal boundaries. She had occasional, supervised contact with the grandchildren, often mediated by Miss Davies or the independent trustee, ensuring their parents couldn't use the visits for manipulation. Her new life was quieter, but it was entirely her own. The peace she found wasn't in reconciliation, which felt impossible, but in knowing she had stood up for herself, protected her independence, and refused to be exploited. She looked out the window of her new home, no longer haunted by the fear of being pushed out, but filled with the quiet satisfaction of a battle fought, and won, not with aggression, but with intelligence and dignity. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself.